Evelyn Carter lived far away from the noise and crowds of the city. Her home was a small, weathered house on the edge of a vast desert. The land around her was dry and dusty, with rocks scattered everywhere and only a few stubborn plants clinging to life. It wasn't the kind of place most people would choose to live, but Evelyn liked it that way. She preferred solitude, keeping to herself and avoiding the curious stares of others. What made her even more unusual was her constant companion, massive serpent named Silas. Silas was unlike any snake anyone had ever seen. His body was long and sleek, covered in shimmering golden scales that caught the sunlight like liquid fire. When he moved, his coils slid across the ground silently, almost gracefully, but there was no mistaking the danger he carried. His fangs were sharp, dripping with venom so powerful that even a single bite could leave a grown man paralyzed within seconds. People in the nearby town talked about Silas often, whispering stories about how viciously he attacked anyone who came too close to Evelyn's property. Some claimed they'd seen him strike without warning, while others swore they heard his menacing hiss echo through the night air. No one dared go near Evelyn's house because of Silas. Those who tried quickly regretted it. One man, desperate to ask Evelyn about selling her land, took a step onto her property, only to find himself face to face with the serpent. Before he could blink, Silas lunged forward, sinking his fangs into the man's leg. He collapsed instantly, unable to move as the venom coursed through his veins. Thankfully, Evelyn intervened before things got worse, dragging the man back to safety and giving him an antidote she kept on hand. But the incident spread fear throughout the town, and after that, everyone stayed away. The townsfolk had many theories about Evelyn and her pet. Some believed she controlled Silas through dark magic, using spells or curses to bend him to her will. Others thought she must have raised him from birth, creating such a strong bond that the serpent would do anything to protect her. A few even whispered that Silas wasn't entirely natural, that perhaps he was some ancient creature brought back to life by forces beyond human understanding. Whatever the truth was, no one could deny the fear they felt whenever they saw the golden serpent slithering near Evelyn's fence. Despite all the rumors, Evelyn rarely spoke to anyone. She was a quiet woman, tall and slender with auburn hair that fell loosely around her shoulders. Her hands were calloused from years of hard work, and her face bore faint lines that hinted at both wisdom and hardship. She spent most of her days tending to her garden or walking along the rocky paths outside her home with Silas trailing beside her. To outsiders, their relationship seemed strange, almost unnatural, but Evelyn treated the serpent with the same care and affection one might show a loyal dog. For years, this arrangement worked perfectly for Evelyn. She had everything she needed: food, shelter, and her faithful companion. But then something unexpected happened. A stranger arrived in town, throwing everything off balance. His name was Daniel Harper, and he was unlike anyone who had visited before. Daniel was a tall man with short brown hair and piercing blue eyes. His clothes were simple: jeans, boots, and a plain shirt. But he carried himself with confidence. There was a calmness about him, a sense that he knew exactly what he wanted and how to get it. At first, the townspeople didn't pay much attention to Daniel. They assumed he was just another traveler passing through, looking for supplies or a place to rest. But instead of leaving after a day or two, Daniel rented a room at the local inn and began asking questions about Evelyn and her serpent. He listened intently to the stories people told, nodding occasionally but never offering his own opinions. After gathering enough information, he started spending hours sitting on the inn's porch, staring out toward Evelyn's distant house through a pair of binoculars. It didn't take long for word of Daniel's interest to reach Evelyn. One evening, as she sat on her porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, she noticed movement in the distance. Squinting, she spotted a figure standing near the edge of her property line. Her heart raced as she recognized the man from town, the one everyone called Daniel Harper. Without hesitation, she grabbed a lantern and hurried outside, calling for Silas to follow her. "Who's there?" Evelyn demanded, holding the lantern high so its light spilled over the rocky terrain. Daniel stepped into view, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. "My name is Daniel Harper," he said calmly. "I'm not here to cause trouble." Evelyn frowned, gripping the lantern tighter. Beside her, Silas hissed loudly, his golden scales glinting in the dim light. The serpent coiled protectively around her legs, ready to strike if necessary. "You shouldn't be here," Evelyn warned. "Go back to town where you belong." "I can't do that," Daniel replied. "Not until I've spoken with you." "And why would I want to speak with you?" Evelyn snapped, her voice sharp with suspicion. "Because I know more about your friend here than you might think," Daniel said, nodding toward Silas. "And I believe we can help each other." For a moment, Evelyn hesitated. She glanced down at Silas, whose glowing eyes remained fixed on the intruder. Though she trusted the serpent completely, there was something about Daniel's tone that gave her pause. He didn't sound like someone trying to trick her. In fact, he sounded sincere. Against her better judgment, Evelyn decided to hear him out, at least for now. Little did she know, this decision would change everything. Daniel stood calmly under the watchful gaze of Silas, the golden serpent coiled tightly around Evelyn's legs. The air was tense, filled with the low hissing sound that seemed to vibrate through the ground itself. Evelyn held her lantern high, casting flickering shadows across the rocky landscape. Her expression was a mix of anger and suspicion, but there was also a flicker of curiosity in her eyes. "What do you mean, you know more about him?" Evelyn asked finally, her voice sharp, but steady. She gestured toward Silas with a slight nod, careful not to make any sudden movements that might provoke the serpent further. Daniel took a cautious step forward, keeping his hands raised in a gesture of peace. "I mean exactly what I said," he replied. "Your pet Silas isn't just an ordinary snake. He's part of a species that's incredibly rare, maybe even extinct in the wild. And I think I can explain why he behaves the way he does." Evelyn narrowed her eyes, studying Daniel carefully. His calm demeanor didn't waver, even as Silas let out another warning hiss. The serpent's body shifted slightly, its muscles tensing as though preparing to strike. But Evelyn placed a firm hand on his scaled back, silently urging him to stay still. For now, Silas obeyed, though his glowing eyes remained locked onto the stranger. "You're wasting your time," Evelyn said after a moment. "I don't need anyone explaining my pet to me. I've raised him since he hatched. I know him better than anyone." "I'm sure you do," Daniel agreed quickly, taking care not to sound dismissive. "But there are things about him you might not understand, things I can help you see more clearly." Evelyn hesitated again, unsure whether to trust this man who had appeared out of nowhere. On one hand, she wanted to send him away and return to the quiet life she had built for herself. On the other hand, something about Daniel's words struck a chord deep inside her. Over the years, she had wondered about Silas's origins, about why he was so different from other creatures. If Daniel truly knew something about him, then perhaps it was worth hearing him out. "Fine," Evelyn said, at last lowering the lantern slightly. "But if you try anything funny, my friend here won't hesitate to stop you." Daniel nodded, understanding the unspoken threat. "Fair enough." With a final glance at Silas, Evelyn turned and led the way back to her house. The golden serpent followed closely behind, his massive body sliding effortlessly over the uneven terrain. Daniel trailed a few steps behind, doing his best to appear non-threatening despite the tension radiating from both human and serpent. Inside the small, dimly lit home, Evelyn set the lantern on a wooden table and motioned for Daniel to sit. The room was simple, with bare walls and only a few pieces of furniture scattered around. A worn couch sat in one corner, while shelves lined with books and jars of herbs occupied another. Despite the lack of decoration, the space felt cozy and lived in. "So, talk," Evelyn said, crossing her arms as she leaned against the wall. Silas curled up near her feet, his head resting on his coils but his eyes still fixed on Daniel. Daniel took a deep breath before beginning. "Years ago, my grandfather was part of a research team studying unusual animals in remote areas. They were searching for creatures that didn't fit into known categories, animals with abilities or traits that defied explanation. One day they stumbled upon a group of serpents like Silas. These weren't ordinary snakes, they were intelligent, capable of forming bonds with humans and communicating in ways we're only beginning to understand. Evelyn listened intently, her brow furrowed as she processed his words. "And what happened to them?" she asked. "They were hunted," Daniel said grimly. "People heard rumors about their venom and how valuable it could be. Instead of protecting them, most chose to exploit them. My grandfather managed to save a few notes and samples before the project was shut down, but by then, the species was nearly wiped out." "And you think Silas is one of those serpents?" Evelyn asked skeptically. "Yes," Daniel replied without hesitation. "Look at him, his size, his coloration, his behavior. It all matches what my grandfather described. But there's more. These serpents aren't naturally aggressive. They attack because they're scared or feel threatened. With the right approach, they can learn to trust humans completely." Evelyn glanced down at Silas, who seemed content to rest beside her. She had always believed he acted out of loyalty, defending her from anyone who came too close. Could it be possible that his aggression stemmed from fear rather than malice? "How do you know all this?" she asked, her voice softer now. "My grandfather documented everything he learned," Daniel explained. "He spent years studying these creatures, learning their habits and finding ways to communicate with them. When he passed away, I inherited his work. It's become my mission to protect any surviving members of their kind and to teach others how to coexist with them." Evelyn fell silent, letting Daniel's words sink in. Part of her wanted to dismiss him as a liar or a fool chasing some impossible dream, but another part, the part that had spent countless nights wondering about Silas's true nature, felt a spark of hope. If Daniel was telling the truth, then maybe there was a way to change how people saw her companion. Maybe they wouldn't have to live in fear anymore. "Prove it," Evelyn said suddenly, breaking the silence. "If you really know so much about him, prove it." Daniel nodded, unsurprised by her demand. Slowly he knelt beside Silas, keeping his movements deliberate and smooth. The serpent tensed immediately, hissing softly as he lifted his head to meet Daniel's gaze. Evelyn stepped closer, ready to intervene if necessary, but Daniel raised a hand to signal he was fine. Then, in a low, rhythmic tone, Daniel began speaking. At first, the words sounded like nonsense, a series of soft sounds and repeated phrases that meant nothing to Evelyn. But as he continued, something incredible happened. Silas stopped hissing and tilted his head, almost as though he were listening intently. His body relaxed slightly and his glowing eyes softened. Evelyn stared in disbelief, her heart pounding in her chest. She had never seen Silas respond to anyone like this before. Even when she spoke to him, he reacted with affection rather than focus. But here he was, completely entranced by Daniel's voice. When Daniel finished speaking, he looked up at Evelyn, his expression calm but expectant. "See? I told you I could help." For a long moment, Evelyn didn't say anything. She simply watched as Silas settled back onto the floor, his earlier tension replaced by what could only be described as contentment. Finally, she exhaled slowly, shaking her head in wonder. "How did you do that?" she whispered. "It's not magic," Daniel replied gently. "It's understanding your pet isn't just a creature, he's a being with thoughts and feelings. And if we work together, we can show others the same truth." Evelyn didn't respond right away. Instead, she sank onto the couch, her mind racing with possibilities. This stranger had walked into her life and turned everything upside down in a matter of minutes. Yet, for the first time in years, she felt a glimmer of hope, not just for herself, but for Silas too. "All right," she said finally, meeting Daniel's gaze. "Let's see where this goes." Over the next few days, Daniel became a regular visitor at Evelyn's home. Each morning he arrived with notebooks and tools, ready to spend hours observing Silas and teaching Evelyn new ways to interact with him. At first, Evelyn was hesitant, unsure whether she could trust this stranger fully. But as time passed, she began to see changes, not just in Silas but in herself as well. Daniel's methods were simple yet effective. He showed Evelyn how to use certain sounds and tones when speaking to Silas, explaining that these noises mimicked the language of his kind. To Evelyn's surprise, Silas responded almost immediately, tilting his head or shifting his body in ways that seemed deliberate and thoughtful. It was as if the serpent understood every word, even though Evelyn couldn't grasp their meaning herself. "You're doing great," Daniel encouraged her one afternoon as they sat together on the porch. Silas lay coiled nearby, his golden scales shimmering in the sunlight. "He's picking up on your energy now, not just your voice." Evelyn smiled faintly, feeling a sense of accomplishment she hadn't felt in years. For so long she had thought of Silas as her protector, a fierce companion who kept the world at bay. But now she realized there was more to their bond than fear and loyalty. With Daniel's guidance, she was learning to communicate with Silas in ways that went beyond instinct. She could tell when he was curious, content, or even playful, and it made her feel closer to him than ever before. But Daniel wasn't just teaching Evelyn about Silas. He was also sharing pieces of himself. Over meals and late-night conversations, he spoke about his grandfather and the research team that had discovered the serpents. He told stories of traveling to remote places, searching for signs of creatures like Silas, only to come up empty-handed. His dedication to protecting these animals was clear, and Evelyn found herself admiring his passion. In turn, Evelyn opened up about her own life. She talked about how she had stumbled upon Silas as a tiny hatchling, abandoned and weak. She described the long nights spent nursing him back to health and the joy she felt when he finally grew strong enough to explore the world around them. For years, she had kept these memories to herself, afraid of being judged or misunderstood. But with Daniel, she felt safe. He listened without judgment, asking questions that showed he truly cared. Their partnership deepened as they worked together, each day bringing new discoveries. One evening, while watching Silas slither through the tall grass near the house, Daniel turned to Evelyn with an idea. "What if we showed the town what you've learned?" he suggested. "If people saw Silas responding to you and to me, they might stop fearing him." Evelyn frowned, shaking her head. "They won't listen. They've already made up their minds about him." "Maybe," Daniel admitted. "But if we don't try, nothing will change. You deserve a chance to live without constantly looking over your shoulder." Evelyn hesitated, torn between her desire for peace and her fear of rejection. She knew Daniel was right. The townspeople's hostility weighed heavily on her, even if she tried not to show it. Still, the thought of facing them again filled her with dread. "We'll take it slow," Daniel promised, sensing her unease. "Start small. Just let me handle the details." Reluctantly, Evelyn agreed. Together, they began planning a demonstration, a way to introduce Silas to the townsfolk, without causing panic. Daniel suggested holding the event in the town square where everyone could gather safely. He assured Evelyn that he would prepare the crowd beforehand, explaining Silas's nature and emphasizing the importance of patience and respect. As the day of the demonstration approached, Evelyn grew increasingly nervous. She spent hours practicing the techniques Daniel had taught her, determined to make sure everything went smoothly. Silas seemed to sense her anxiety, staying close by her side and offering silent support. Finally, the morning arrived. Evelyn dressed in her simplest clothes, tying her auburn hair back into a loose braid. Daniel met her outside her house, carrying a small bag filled with supplies. Silas trailed behind them, his massive form gliding effortlessly across the ground. Tatorwem walk to town was quiet, the weight of anticipation hanging heavy in the air. When they reached the square, Evelyn was surprised to see a large crowd gathered. Some faces were curious, while others wore expressions of suspicion or outright hostility. A few people muttered under their breath, casting wary glances at Silas. Evelyn's heart sank, but Daniel placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "It's going to be okay," he said softly. "Just follow my lead." Standing at the center of the square, Daniel addressed the crowd. "Thank you all for coming today," he began, his voice calm and steady. "Many of you have heard stories about Evelyn Carter and her companion Silas. Some of those stories are true. He is powerful, and his venom can cause harm if provoked. But there's another side to him that most of you haven't seen." He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. "Silas isn't a monster. He's intelligent, capable of forming bonds with humans, and deeply protective of those he trusts. Today, Evelyn and I want to show you that fear doesn't have to rule our interactions with creatures like him." Stepping aside, Daniel motioned for Evelyn to join him. Taking a deep breath, she moved forward, standing beside Silas as the serpent raised his head proudly. The crowd murmured nervously, some people instinctively taking a step back. But Evelyn remained calm, meeting their gazes with quiet determination. Then, Daniel knelt beside Silas and began whispering in the same rhythmic tone he had used before. Once again, the serpent relaxed, lowering his head and allowing Daniel to touch his scales gently. Gasps rippled through the crowd as they watched the once feared creature respond so peacefully. Encouraged by Silas's reaction, Evelyn knelt beside him as well, speaking softly in the language Daniel had taught her. To her relief, Silas turned toward her, his glowing eyes soft and trusting. The sight brought tears to Evelyn's eyes, tears of pride and gratitude. One by one, a few brave individuals stepped forward, tentatively reaching out to touch Silas's shimmering scales. Though some still looked uneasy, others marveled at the serpent's beauty and grace. By the end of the demonstration, the mood in the square had shifted entirely. Fear gave way to curiosity, and hostility softened into understanding. As Evelyn stood beside Daniel and Silas, watching the crowd disperse, she felt a profound sense of relief. Things wouldn't change overnight, but for the first time in years she believed they could find a way to coexist. And with Daniel by her side, she knew she wouldn't have to face the challenges ahead alone. The days following the demonstration in the town square brought a mix of relief and uncertainty for Evelyn. The townsfolk had left the event with more questions than answers, but the fear that once surrounded Silas seemed to lessen, at least for some. A handful of people approached Evelyn afterward, expressing curiosity rather than hostility. They asked about Silas's behavior, his needs, and how she managed to live alongside such a powerful creature. Evelyn answered their questions patiently, grateful for the shift in tone. However, not everyone was convinced. Some residents still viewed Silas as a threat, refusing to believe that he could ever be anything but dangerous. Whispers spread through the town, fueled by those who clung to old fears and suspicions. "What if he turns on them?" one man muttered at the local diner. "That thing is wild at heart. No amount of training will change that." Others worried that Daniel's presence signaled trouble. Perhaps he was using Evelyn and her serpent for personal gain or exploiting them for secrets about the creature's venom. These doubts weighed heavily on Evelyn. Even though she tried to ignore them, she had grown used to living on the fringes of society, but now the spotlight felt uncomfortably bright. Every visit to the market or trip into town drew stares, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Silas, too, seemed restless, his golden scales shimmering uneasily under the sun as though sensing the tension in the air. Daniel noticed the strain on Evelyn and did his best to reassure her. "Change takes time," he said one evening as they sat together on the porch. The desert breeze carried the scent of dry earth and distant rain, a rare promise of relief from the heat. "Not everyone will understand right away, but you've already made progress." "I know," Evelyn replied, her voice quiet. "But it's hard not to feel like we're fighting a losing battle sometimes." "You're not alone in this," Daniel reminded her. "We'll face it together." His words brought her comfort, but Evelyn couldn't help wondering how long their fragile peace would last. She knew the townspeople wouldn't stay silent forever. Sooner or later, someone would push back, and when they did, she needed to be ready. To prepare, Evelyn and Daniel worked tirelessly to strengthen their bond with Silas. They practiced communication techniques daily, refining the methods Daniel had taught her. Over time, Evelyn grew more confident in her ability to guide Silas, learning to read his subtle cues and respond appropriately. In return, Silas became calmer and more responsive, his earlier aggression giving way to a quiet trust. Their efforts paid off in unexpected ways. One afternoon, while walking along the rocky paths near Evelyn's home, they encountered a group of children playing near the edge of her property. Normally, Silas would have hissed a warning and forced them to retreat, but this time, Evelyn stepped forward instead. Speaking softly, she introduced herself and explained that Silas wasn't dangerous unless provoked. To prove her point, she allowed the serpent to slither closer, letting the curious children touch his smooth scales under her watchful eye. The experience left a lasting impression on both the kids and their parents. Word spread quickly, and soon, more families began visiting Evelyn's land, not out of fear but out of fascination. They marveled at Silas's beauty and intelligence, asking questions and sharing stories of their own encounters with wildlife. For the first time, Evelyn felt like part of the community rather than an outsider. Despite these positive developments, tensions simmered beneath the surface. A few outspoken individuals refused to let go of their distrust, accusing Evelyn and Daniel of manipulating the townspeople. One evening, a heated argument broke out at the local inn, where several men gathered to voice their concerns. "That snake doesn't belong here," one of them declared loudly. "It's only a matter of time before someone gets hurt." Daniel overheard the conversation and decided to address it directly. Stepping into the room, he faced the crowd with calm determination. "Silas isn't a danger unless you make him one," he said firmly. "He's intelligent, capable of understanding and responding to human emotions. If you approach him with respect, he'll do the same." The men scoffed, unwilling to listen. But Daniel didn't back down. "Fear won't solve anything," he continued. "If you want proof, come see for yourselves. Talk to Evelyn. Spend time with Silas. Once you understand him, you'll realize there's nothing to be afraid of." Though his words fell on deaf ears that night, they planted a seed of doubt in some minds. Slowly, a small group of skeptics began to reconsider their stance, agreeing to meet with Evelyn and observe Silas firsthand. These visits were tense at first, but with patience and persistence, Evelyn and Daniel managed to ease their fears. By showing them how Silas responded to kindness and understanding, they chipped away at years of prejudice. As weeks turned into months, life in the town began to change. While not everyone accepted Silas completely, the hostility diminished significantly. People started treating Evelyn with more respect, acknowledging the care and dedication she showed toward her companion. Even those who remained wary kept their distance, choosing silence over confrontation. Through it all, Evelyn and Daniel grew closer. Their shared mission created a bond neither had expected, built on mutual trust and admiration. Evelyn admired Daniel's unwavering commitment to protecting creatures like Silas, while Daniel respected Evelyn's strength and resilience. Together, they formed a partnership that felt natural and effortless. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Evelyn turned to Daniel with a thoughtful expression. "Do you think we'll ever truly convince everyone?" she asked. "Probably not," Daniel admitted, "but that's not the goal. What matters is that we've shown them another way, a better way, and maybe over time, they'll come around." Evelyn nodded, smiling faintly. For so long she had lived in fear of judgment and rejection. Now, with Daniel and Silas by her side, she felt hopeful for the future. Though challenges lay ahead, she knew they could face them together. Months passed, and the town slowly adjusted to the presence of Evelyn and Silas. The once hostile whispers faded into quiet acceptance, though not everyone fully embraced the idea of living alongside a golden serpent. Still, the fear that had once driven people away was replaced by cautious curiosity. Children often visited Evelyn's property, marveling at Silas's shimmering scales and his gentle demeanor when approached with care. Parents stood nearby, watching nervously, but no longer shouting warnings or dragging their kids away. Evelyn found herself growing more comfortable with these visits. She welcomed questions from the townsfolk, explaining how Silas communicated through subtle movements and sounds. With Daniel's help, she demonstrated the techniques they used to interact with the serpent, showing that understanding and patience could turn fear into trust. Over time, even the skeptics began to soften their stance, though some still kept their distance. Daniel remained a constant presence in Evelyn's life. He spent most of his days helping her care for Silas, studying the serpent's behavior and documenting their progress. His notebooks were filled with sketches and notes, capturing every detail of Silas's actions and responses. But beyond his work, Daniel became a true friend to Evelyn. Their shared mission brought them closer, creating a bond that neither had anticipated. They laughed together over simple meals, discussed their dreams for the future, and found comfort in each other's company. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the desert sky in hues of orange and pink, Daniel turned to Evelyn with a thoughtful expression. "You've changed so much since I first arrived," he said softly. "Not just in how you handle Silas, but in how you see yourself." Evelyn smiled faintly, brushing a strand of auburn hair behind her ear. "I think we've both changed," she replied. "Before you came along, I thought I'd spend the rest of my life hiding out here, afraid of what might happen if anyone got too close, but now, I feel like maybe there's a place for us after all." Daniel nodded, his blue eyes reflecting the fading light. "There is. And it's not just about convincing others to accept Silas. It's about showing them that coexistence is possible. You've already proven that." The two fell silent, watching as Silas slithered gracefully across the rocky ground. His golden scales caught the last rays of sunlight, glowing softly before the night took hold. For a moment, everything felt peaceful, almost perfect. But life rarely stayed quiet for long. A few weeks later, trouble arrived in the form of outsiders. A group of researchers from a distant city came to town, claiming to have heard rumors about Silas. They introduced themselves as members of an organization dedicated to studying rare creatures, insisting they only wanted to observe and document him. At first glance, they seemed harmless enough, carrying cameras and notebooks instead of weapons. But Evelyn sensed something off about them, a coldness in their gaze, a hunger for knowledge that bordered on obsession. "They're not like you," Evelyn told Daniel one evening after meeting the researchers. "They don't care about protecting him. They want to take him away, study him in labs, dissect him if they have to." Daniel frowned, sharing her unease. "We can't let that happen," he said firmly. "If they try anything, we'll stop them." Together, they devised a plan to keep Silas safe. Evelyn limited the researchers' access to her property, allowing them only brief, supervised visits. She made it clear that any attempt to interfere with Silas would result in immediate consequences. Daniel backed her up, using his authority as someone knowledgeable about the species to argue against invasive testing or capture. The researchers grew frustrated, their polite smiles giving way to thinly veiled threats. "This creature is a scientific marvel," one of them insisted during a tense meeting. "He doesn't belong hidden away in the desert. The world deserves to know about him. He belongs here," Evelyn shot back, her voice steady despite the anger rising in her chest. "With me, where he's safe." Though the standoff continued for days, Evelyn and Daniel refused to back down. Eventually, the researchers realized they wouldn't win this fight, not without causing a scene that would draw unwanted attention. Reluctantly, they packed up their equipment and left, vowing to return another day. When they were finally gone, Evelyn let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "Do you think they'll come back?" she asked Daniel quietly. "Maybe," he admitted. "But next time we'll be ready." Despite the lingering threat, Evelyn felt a renewed sense of determination. She knew protecting Silas wouldn't be easy, but she also knew she wasn't alone. With Daniel by her side, she felt capable of facing whatever challenges lay ahead. As the months turned into years, Evelyn and Daniel built a life together on the outskirts of town. They expanded Evelyn's small home, adding rooms and supplies to accommodate their shared work. Silas thrived under their care, growing larger and stronger while maintaining his calm, trusting nature. The townspeople, once fearful of the serpent, began to view him as a symbol of hope, a reminder that understanding could overcome fear. Evelyn and Daniel also worked to spread awareness about creatures like Silas, traveling occasionally to speak at conferences and meet with conservationists. Their efforts inspired others to rethink their perceptions of misunderstood animals, sparking movements aimed at protecting endangered species. Through it all, they returned home to the desert, where Silas waited patiently for them. On quiet evenings, as the three of them sat together under the stars, Evelyn felt a deep sense of fulfillment. She had started her journey alone, burdened by isolation and mistrust, but now she had a family, human and serpent alike, that supported and loved her unconditionally. Life wasn't without its challenges, but Evelyn knew she could face them, head on. With Daniel's guidance and Silas's loyalty, she had learned to embrace the unknown, finding strength in the bonds she had forged. Together, they proved that even the most unlikely companions could create something beautiful, a future built on trust, compassion, and mutual respect.